He wondered how much a broken place could tell about a broken boy, and whether ruins remembered the people who once walked through them, or if they simply held their breath until someone finally returned. The path leading into the valley was thinner than he remembered, swallowed by tall grass and a hush that settled over everything, like an old coat left out in the rain. Daniel moved slowly, one hand holding the frayed strap of the backpack he'd found in a donation bin months ago, the other gently resting on the wiry fur of the dog padding beside him. Finn never walked ahead of him, never behind, always at his left side, as if he'd appointed himself Daniel's shadow, guardian, and only witness to a life that had unfolded in alleys, shelters, and temporary corners of other people's warmth. The air was heavy with the scent of pine sap, wet earth, and the faint smoke of a distant chimney. It all felt too familiar, too close, like a ghost of a memory brushing its fingers against the back of his neck. He stopped on the ridge overlooking the valley. The cabin stood below, a scar on the landscape, half collapsed, roof caved in on the left side, porch slanted forward, as if bowing under the weight of years and storms. The windows were empty, sockets staring out at nothing. Daniel's breath trembled, and he didn't know if it was from the cold or from the ache rising again, the one that felt like a hand squeezing his lungs. "This is it," he murmured. His voice sounded older than 15. Finn leaned gently against his knee, sensing the shift inside him. Daniel cleared his throat. "I thought it would look smaller." He tried to laugh, but it came out like a cough. Finn's tail brushed the ground once, soft as a whisper. They descended slowly. The grass brushed against Daniel's jeans, and every step felt like walking deeper into someone else's story, though the truth was crueler. This story had once been his. The cabin had belonged to his father, or rather, the ruins had. What his father left behind wasn't a home. It was an echo of what could have been, the only place Daniel remembered being warm, back before warm things slipped through his fingers. The boards creaked under his weight as he stepped onto the porch. It groaned like something waking up. He paused, his hand hovering above the frame of the door. The wood was cold. Finn sniffed the air, ears perked, tail stiff. "It's okay," Daniel whispered. "There's no one left." He pushed the door slowly, though there was no resistance. It swung inward with a whine, revealing dust, fallen beams, and a silence that seemed too heavy for such a small space. There it was, the old iron stove, rusted through, leaning sideways like it had been punched. The corner where his father's chair once sat was buried under pieces of roof. The table they used to eat at lay broken, one leg missing. Everything was smaller. Everything was gone. Daniel stepped inside. Finn followed, careful, quiet. The floor was soft in places, as if the house was dissolving from the inside out. Daniel's throat tightened. He didn't cry. He didn't know how to anymore, but the weight inside his chest sank deeper. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the folded letter he kept tucked between two shirts for months. The paper was wrinkled, edges softened from being handled too often. He didn't unfold it. He didn't need to. He knew every word. He knew the signature at the bottom, knew the uneven scrawl, as if it were a scar carved into him. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone." His father's words, The man who left him with nothing but a memory of warm hands, a laugh he barely remembered, and a cabin abandoned to rot. Daniel closed his eyes. The silence shifted with the wind. He didn't come here for forgiveness. He didn't come for answers. He came because the world outside never felt like his. But this place, ruined as it was, still whispered his name. He walked toward the back of the cabin where the roof had collapsed fully. Finn whined softly, hesitant to follow. "Stay there," Daniel said gently. "I just need to see." He crouched near the fallen beams. Something beneath the debris caught his eye. Metal, glinting faintly where a thin beam of light cut through the broken roof. He brushed away dirt and bits of rotted wood until the object revealed itself. A tin box, edges dented, paint peeling. His breath hitched. His father used to keep small things in his pockets, bolts, coins, stray bits of metal that jingled when he walked. He always liked the feel of weight in his hands. Daniel sat on his heels and pulled the box free. The lid was rusted shut. Finn padded closer, sniffing it, ears perked high. Daniel held the box in both hands. It felt heavier than it should, as if something inside it wasn't just an object, as if it was waiting. He didn't open it? Not yet. Instead, he stood, box pressed against his chest, like something fragile. He stepped outside where the light was clearer. The valley stretched before him, quiet, abandoned, untouched. The village on the far end was barely visible, smoke drifting from chimneys like threads rising into the air. He wondered if anyone there remembered him. A skinny boy with a father who drank too much and smiled too rarely. A boy who vanished when tragedy took what little he had. The wind eased. The silence settled again. Daniel exhaled slowly. "We can fix this," he whispered. Finn tilted his head. Daniel ran his fingers through the dog's fur. "I don't know how, but I can't live out there forever. You know that." The dog pressed his nose into Daniel's palm. Daniel looked back at the cabin. The broken beams, the crooked porch, the sagging roof. It was a corpse, yet something in it looked back at him. Something stubborn. Something waiting to be revived. He didn't notice how tight he was gripping the tin box until his knuckles went numb. He carried it to a flat rock near the porch and sat. Finn curled beside him, tail touching Daniel's ankle. "Okay," Daniel murmured. "Let's see what he left us." He wedged his thumb under the edge of the lid and pushed. Rust cracked. Metal scraped. The lid snapped open with a sharp sound that echoed across the quiet valley. Inside lay a folded cloth bundle, tied with twine. Daniel's pulse quickened. His fingers trembled as he untied the knot. Finn watched, still, silent, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. The cloth unfolded. Inside were 3 objects: a carpenter's pencil, worn, half-used, but intact; a small brass compass, its glass cracked, needle quivering slightly in the breeze; and a photograph, edges torn, colors faded. Daniel stared at it. Breath caught in his lungs. A man with tired eyes and a scruffy beard. A younger Daniel standing in front of him, missing a front tooth, smile stretched wide as if nothing in the world could hurt him. His father's hand rested on his shoulder. The cabin stood behind them, whole and alive. Daniel's vision blurred, not with tears, just with a sudden rush of memory, like the world tipping sideways for a moment. He turned the photo over. A few faint words were scrawled on the back. "For when you come home." Home. The word felt like a stone dropped into deep water. Why would he? Daniel's voice frayed. The pencil trembled in his hand. The compass clicked gently as its needle twitched. They weren't just objects. They were instructions. A beginning. Finn nudged his leg softly and then trotted toward the cabin, stopping at the threshold, looking back as if urging him to follow. Daniel rose slowly. He placed the objects back into the tin box, except for the compass. He slipped that into his pocket. He walked around the cabin, taking in every broken angle, every fallen beam, every wound. The wood was weathered, but some boards looked salvageable. The foundation stones, though leaning, were still mostly in place. He could hear his father's voice. Not the real one, but the one Daniel had carried inside him for years, worn smooth by memory. You start with what's standing. You fix what's broken. You don't walk away from something just because it's hard. Daniel set a hand on the porch railing. It sagged under his weight. "I don't know why you left," he said quietly, eyes on the ruined roof. "I don't know why you waited for me to come back, but I'm here." Finn barked once. The sharp sound bounced off the valley walls. Daniel took it as an answer. He stepped away from the cabin and scanned the tree line. Plenty of fallen branches, some old logs. If he could strip them, cut them, shape them. If he learned how. He tightened the strap of his backpack. With the compass in his pocket and the dog at his heel, Daniel walked toward the trees. The wind carried the scent of pine deeper than before, and each step felt steadier, more anchored. The cabin behind him stood silent, watching. He would need tools, a saw, a hammer, nails, rope. Maybe someone in the village would help, if they even recognized him, if they cared. Finn barked again, tail high, and Daniel realized something startling. For the first time in a long while, he was walking toward something, not away. He didn't know how long rebuilding a broken home would take. Weeks, months, maybe the whole winter. But the valley no longer felt abandoned. It felt like a held breath waiting to be released, like a story waiting to be told. Daniel looked over his shoulder one last time at the cabin leaning against the sky, half ruined, half hope. "We'll fix you," he said softly. "I promise." And the valley seemed to listen. Morning arrived with a thin layer of frost covering the valley, the kind that made the grass bow under its own shimmering weight. Daniel stepped out of the cabin just as the first pale light emerged behind the ridgeline. The cold, brushing over his skin, like a cautious hand, testing whether he truly belonged here. Finn followed him closely, paws crunching softly, breath rising in thin, steady plumes. The cabin looked different at dawn, less broken, somehow more patient, as if waiting to see whether the boy who had returned to it would stay long enough to finish what had been abandoned. Daniel hadn't slept much. He'd spent half the night staring at the roof beams, listening to wind slip through the cracks, thinking about the tin box and the 3 small objects inside it that felt heavier than any weight he could lift. When he reached the tree line that morning, tools shoved into his backpack, hands stiff with cold, he felt a strange clarity settle in. Not confidence, something humbler, steadier. A sense that even if he didn't know exactly what he was doing, he could at least begin. And beginning, he reminded himself, was more than his father had ever managed in the end. He spent the first hours reinforcing the foundation. It was messy, exhausting work, digging out old stones, packing new soil, lifting rocks that weighed more than the backpack he'd carried through half the state. Finn hovered nearby, tail flicking as if urging him to keep going, occasionally dragging small sticks toward the work site as offerings Daniel pretended to appreciate. By midday, his knuckles bled, his shoulders burned, and sweat dripped down his temples despite the cold. But when he stepped back, breathing hard, the cabin stood a little straighter. Not perfect, not even close, but different. He could feel it in the ground beneath his boots. After a quick rest, just enough time to split a piece of bread with Finn and take a drink of icy creek water, Daniel made his way toward the village. He needed more supplies, and though the thought of walking through that place again made his stomach coil, he didn't have much choice if he was going to rebuild anything more than a memory. The road into the village felt shorter this time. Maybe because he wasn't wandering. Maybe because for the first time in years, he actually had somewhere concrete to return to. Morrow's store appeared through the bare branches, looking as worn and steady as he remembered. An old building holding itself upright despite the years. When he stepped inside, the bell above the door gave its tired chime, and the familiar smell of dust, rope, and old leather wrapped around him. Morrow was behind the counter again, spectacles perched low on his nose as he examined a crate of bolts. He looked up, eyebrows rising. "Back already?" he asked. "Didn't think you'd take on a project that size." "I've started," Daniel replied, trying to keep his voice calm, level. "And if I'm going to finish it, I need more nails. Some oil. Maybe a chisel if you have one cheap." Morrow leaned forward, studying him with the squint of a man who'd already decided something about him. "You work alone?" "Just me and Finn." The dog thumped his tail once. "Cabin that far gone takes more than two," Morrow muttered. But he didn't argue. Instead, he set aside the bolts, came around the counter, and began gathering supplies. A box of nails, a small tin of saw oil, a chisel with a worn but solid handle. "This should keep you going, least for now." Daniel reached into his pocket for his crumpled bills. Morrow waved a hand. "Put it away. Your father helped me once when no one else would. Guess you're helping me, even the score." The words hit Daniel like a soft blow. Unexpected, almost disarming. He didn't know which memory Morrow meant, but hearing something good about his father felt like finding a warm coal in a pile of ash. On the walk back to the cabin, he kept glancing down at the chisel, feeling its weight, imagining where each tool would fit into the work ahead. The afternoon light fractured through the bare branches like shunson of pale gold as he reached the valley again. The cabin waited quietly. The roof still half collapsed, the porch tilted, the window frames empty. But now that he'd seen it stand taller on its newly set foundation, the place no longer looked hopeless. It looked cooperative, as if acknowledging the effort he'd made that morning. He spent the next few hours tearing out the worst sections of the roof, stacking old boards in neat piles, saving whatever wood he could. Finn curled near the porch, watching him with alert eyes, occasionally lifting his head whenever a nail squealed loose or a board cracked under pressure. As the sun dipped lower, painting the cabin walls with long amber streaks. Daniel hammered 2 new support beams into place. Each strike vibrated up his arm, harsh and honest, and with each strike, something inside him seemed to shift as well. Some heaviness he'd carried through cities and shelters, loosening its grip, if only by inches. He didn't hear the car until it turned off the ridge road, gravel crunching beneath its tires. Finn stood, instantly, ears forward, tail stiff. Daniel froze with a nail half set in the beam, waiting. The car door opened slowly. A woman stepped out, coat tightly belted, hair pulled back, movements cautious. She looked at the cabin first, then at Daniel. "Daniel Hale?" she called, voice trembling from something deeper than the cold. He didn't speak, only nodded. She stepped closer, boots sinking lightly into the soft earth. "I'm Claire, your father's sister." The world tilted, not sharply, but like a door cracking open after years swollen shut. He'd heard the name before, from social workers, from half-remembered conversations, when he'd still been small enough to be carried. An aunt who might take him, an aunt who never came. Claire seemed to read every question in his face. "I wasn't ready," she said quietly. "When the accident happened, when everything fell apart, I wasn't the kind of person who should have been caring for a child. I thought about calling. I even tried once. But by the time I did, they said you were already gone." Daniel looked away, jaw tight, not from anger, just from the strange ache of hearing a version of the story he'd rewritten 1,000 times. On nights he slept, under bridges or in quiet corners of shelters. She stepped closer, gaze shifting over the fresh beams, the leveled stones, the careful work of a boy rebuilding something people twice his age wouldn't have touched. "You did all this yourself?" "The village helped," he said simply. Claire nodded slowly, taking in the rising shape of the cabin. "Your father always loved this place," she murmured. "He wasn't good at showing it. He wasn't good at showing much. But he tried to build a life here. He just didn't know how to keep it standing." Her eyes glistened with a mix of regret and memory. "I came because I heard the land was going to be claimed by the town. Then they said someone contested it, a boy with your father's name." Daniel exhaled, the cold burning his lungs. "He left me a letter," he said, "and a compass." Claire swallowed, something like relief softening her features. Then he did at least one thing right. She reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope, edges soft with age. "This was with some of his belongings," she said. "I kept it, thinking one day I'd give it to you. I didn't know when that day would come." She set it on the porch railing. "I'll be in town for a few days, not going anywhere. If you want to talk, I'm here." She didn't wait for an answer. The car door shut softly. The engine hummed back to life, and soon the only sound left was the wind moving through the valley grass. Daniel picked up the envelope with careful fingers, feeling its weight, its quiet promise, but he didn't open it yet. Instead, he laid it inside the tin box and went back to work, the hammer striking a steady rhythm until dusk buried the valley in long shadows. Days passed. Snow came lightly at first, dusting the roof beams, settling on the edges of the window frames like a reminder that winter would not wait for him to finish. Daniel worked faster, stronger. He braced the west wall with 2 thick beams cut from fallen pines. He patched the roof with shingles donated by unseen hands. He rebuilt the porch, replacing its sagging supports with fresh-cut posts that no longer threatened to give beneath his weight. Finn stayed close through all of it, sleeping beside the hearth at night when Daniel managed to coax the old stove into breathing heat again. By the 3rd week, the cabin was no longer a ruin. It wasn't whole, not yet, but it had bones again. It had breath. Smoke rose from the chimney one morning, a thin gray thread twisting into the sky. Someone in the village saw it. By noon, the ridge had a small gathering of people staring down at the valley. Morrow, Mrs. Klein, the farmer from the far hill. Claire stood among them, scarf wrapped tight around her neck. By dusk, they made their way down. Daniel heard their steps and came to the door, wiping sawdust from his hands. The villagers paused at the threshold, as if uncertain whether they had the right to enter. Morrow cleared his throat. "Looks sturdy," he said. "Straighter than it's ever been." Mrs. Klein nodded, pressing a basket into Daniel's hands, bread still warm beneath the cloth. "You've done something good here," she whispered. Claire stepped closer but didn't speak. Daniel opened the door wider. "You can come in," he said. Inside, the stove cast a soft glow across the room. The walls stood even and firm. The loft above held his blanket and the few belongings he owned. The compass hung on the wall beside the photograph. Everything felt small, simple, and completely alive. The villagers stepped in slowly. Their boots thudded softly against the new boards. For a moment, no one said anything, because there was nothing to say. The cabin spoke for itself. Daniel reached for the envelope Claire had left and finally broke the seal. He unfolded the letter and read it quietly, his voice trembling at first, then steadier as the words moved through him like light through broken glass. His father wrote of regret, apology shaped into sentences that wavered but didn't fall apart. He wrote of the cabin, of hope, of the belief that maybe one day Daniel would return to fix what he himself had let collapse. He wrote of love, even when he didn't know how to show it. By the time Daniel folded the letter again, the room was silent except for the soft pop of wood in the stove. Claire brushed a tear from her cheek. Morrow busied himself pretending to examine the hinges on the door. Mrs. Klein smiled through damp eyes. Outside, the wind passed gently along the walls, as if testing their strength and finding them solid. When the villagers finally left, climbing the ridge with quiet steps, Daniel stood in the doorway and watched them go, Finn leaning against his leg. The valley felt different now, not empty, but full of footsteps, memories, warmth flickering through the cold. Daniel looked at the compass on the wall. Its needle rested steady, but the direction didn't matter anymore. He wasn't lost. Not here. Not now. He stepped back inside, closed the door softly, and the cabin, his cabin, held the warmth like a promise.